for this next session. It's structured differently than the others. This is our 21st century panel. And so instead of having, a couple of longer talks, we're going to hear from 5 people who are working in some capacity in the field of mental health care today. So we're going to have 5 approximately 10-minute talks from each of these individuals, and then we're going to have a conversation. I'll be asking 1 or 2 questions, but the audience, both online and in person, is invited to also ask questions, simply because we are going to have 5 people plus myself up at this table here. Just be mindful that we may have to pause and readjust or move a microphone or move one of these huddle pods. For those who were not here earlier, the way this works is that we have these little spaceship shaped gizmos, and we, the audience, when they ask a question, will be asked to speak into these huddle pods. We will also have one of these set up on the table here, so it will pick up the sound coming from the microphones. If I understand that correctly, the huddle pods make it so that the people in the online world can hear us here in this space. So questions have to be asked, comments made into the huddle pod so that we can all be working as a community, and online comments and questions will come to us through Allison Kronstadt, who will be checking them out online and relaying that information to us. So we're just going to take a couple minutes to get folks resituated here, and then we'll get going. So can I ask the 3rd session panelists to come up and join us at this table? And I will then take a moment to introduce each one of you before you talk. So I'll be bouncing up and down, and then I'll join you at the table for our Q&A when it's all said and done. And I really want to express my most sincere thanks to the members of this session, to all of our speakers and participants. Big thanks. This particular session is the most sort of out of our usual realm. And so I am grateful for our viewers and participants for being open to a history institution like Library Company, trying to talk about what's happening in the real world of today. And I'm so grateful for these panelists to come and talk to us here at this incredibly old institution. I think it's, a bit of a leap of faith for all of us to be having this conversation. It's really important, though, like we were saying earlier, for an organization like ourselves to, I've said in the past, to stay relevant. 291 years old can be difficult to stay relevant. It's not so much about staying relevant just to make ourselves continue to feel important, but it's about understanding how the history work that we do has meaning today. It's not just understanding the past, right? It's about plotting that way forward mindfully and with an awareness of what's been tried before and why those things did or did not succeed. So welcome to my panelists. I'm just going to grab a piece of paper and then I'm going to introduce our first speaker. And again, for those who are just joining us, I am Rachel D'Agostino, curator of printed books here at the Library Company and co-curator along with Sophia Dahab of the Hearing Voices exhibition, which is viewable in person until December 22nd and online indefinitely. So check that out. Our first speaker in our 21st century panel is Marc Herzog. Marc is the national coordinator of Irreverent Warriors Incorporated. And Marc is a pre-9/11 Navy veteran and national leadership mentor with Irreverent Warriors. Since attending his first event Irreverent Warriors event in 2016. He has attended 29 suicide prevention events and has risen from attendee to New York City coordinator, to human resources director, to now national coordinator. As a national coordinator, Marc is responsible for the hosting of suicide prevention events in 25 cities across the United States, focused on the use of humor and camaraderie to create support networks and eliminate isolation. When he is not wearing his short shorts and combat boots, we don't have the combat boots today, but you get the idea. Thank you. Marc is a full-time cybersecurity analyst and consultant. I would like to think that you're doing some of your cybersecurity analysis in the short shorts and combat boots. Just
most of it.
Okay, great, excellent.
Business on top, party on the bottom.
Nice, love it. For the online crowd, that was business on top, party on the bottom. His hobbies include making movie references at inopportune times, singing poorly, and leveling up his dad joke cred. He and his wife, Sarah, have been married for 16 years and they have a teenage daughter. Thank you so much, Marc.
Thank you. Now, is this?
It would sort of simplify things. I think if you came up, no, he can go over there. Okay, so I'm going to bring the huddle pod to you then, over here.
With the mic?
There's not currently a huddle pod on the table.
It's picking up the one from the podium.
For
So I
real?
think we're okay.
Okay, the online people will definitely let us know if something doesn't sound loud enough, and we'll correct that. But yeah, you can stay seated right there. That's wonderful.
But if I'm seated, no one sees the
That's true.
selfies. Anyway, hi, I'm Marc Herzog. One of the reasons that we wear silkies, number one, it's part of our uniform. It's the first thing that we're issued in the military. We use them for PT, and it's really a remarkably comfortable piece of clothing. They're called silkies. They're also called ranger panties. Take your pick, depending on what branch you're in. The Army calls them ranger panties. The reason we wear them is, number one, we're comfortable in them, but also we're a bit exposed in them. They don't leave a whole lot to the imagination, and it requires people to see us, especially for us to see each other. We are not a suicide awareness organization. We're a suicide prevention organization. And what we do is we put on the Silkies hikes, where we hike through approximately 90 cities throughout the world, of which I'm responsible for 25. And we hike at around 2.5 miles an hour, so that everyone can finish the hike together. You start together, you finish together as one cohesive unit. And during that time, it's a very slow walk. So we have the ability to speak with each other and find other people within our element who have seen what we've seen and done what we've done and felt how we felt. And the objective is to create your support network, because the existing treatments that we get once we leave the military aren't working. And I'm not here to pass judgment on any other organization or established medical facility without naming any names, because we do want to work with all of them. What is currently happening isn't working. And our organization was created because our founder, who was a captain in the Marines, realized that he was losing more Marines at home than he ever did downrange to suicide. So he decided to get a bunch of Marines that he knew together on a beach in California, and they all wore silkies and combat boots and had a great time. And word about this spread like wildfire. And before he knew it, other events were cropping up throughout the US. That was in 2015. In the 7 years since, we've grown from 1 to 90. We have approximately 130 people attending our annual leadership conference now. we have found that by creating these support networks, we're able to keep people off the ledge. Do we have any empirical data? No, because how do you quantify that? But I can tell you for certainty that the last time I thought of suicide was the day before my first hike in 2016. It saved my life. IW has given me an outlet, a community that I fit into. Because when I went to boot camp, I learned how to eat meals differently. I learned how to get dressed differently. I learned how to shoot. I learned how to kill. And when I re-engaged in the civilian world, I couldn't talk to anybody about any of those things. Because who understands? So I spent 15 years between September 11th and 2016 trying to find a community that I fit into. And then once I happened upon IW, my life changed. My marriage changed. I was on the verge of divorce. I was a mean, rotten person. And it got progressively worse year after year until I found IW. So how do you quantify that? I have no idea. But there are thousands of veterans out there who will tell you the same thing that I'm telling you now. We are better people because we have this community that we fit into. Now, because we use humor and camaraderie, I will tell you 2 fun facts about myself. There are crossroad events in life that cause people to hear the call to service. The first Gulf War was a crossroad event for me. And that happened in 1990. And I said, as soon as I graduate high school, I need to serve. And I was trying to figure out what branch to serve in. But as you heard in my intro, I'm a bit of a movie buff. And there was a movie that came out in 1990 that really shaped what branch I went into. It was The Hunt for Red October. And I actually went in to become a nuclear reactor operator, which would cause me to serve on submarines. What ship did I wind up serving on? It was a Marine limousine, an amphibious assault ship. Definitely did not submerge intentionally. It was a flat bottom boat, so it sat on top of the water and very little of it was underneath. And when I first checked on board that ship, there was an initiation called the Mail Buoy Watch. And this is an indication of the kind of humor that we develop in the military. When you first check on board your first ship, you have no idea how the mail is delivered. And one day we heard over the loudspeaker, attend the Mail Buoy Watch. And all of a sudden, someone grabbed me, put me in a life jacket, put a harness on me and tied a line to the harness, gave me a 10-foot boat hook and said, go to the port side of the ship, the left side. And I'm pointing to the right, the left side. And prepare for the mail buoy. So, all right, I'm assuming that the mail's dropped in the water on a buoy and you got to hook it with the boat hook. And that's pretty much what they explained to me. And you hear over the loudspeaker, mail buoy in 300 yards. So they see it. And I'm looking over the side. I don't see anything in the water. And they say 200 yards. And the guys tending my line are like, are you ready? Do you see it? You ready? They're ramping me up. And I have no clue what they're looking for. I've never seen a mail buoy before. They count down 100, then 50, 25 yards. And I'm frantically trying to hook something. I have no idea what I'm looking for. There's nothing in the water, but apparently there's something. And one guy came up, they said, you missed it. And 30 seconds later, a guy runs up with a shredded mail bag saying, you ruined our mail. There's no such thing as a mail book. The mail's delivered by helicopter every 3 to 5 days. So it's this kind of initiation and humor that actually builds a bond within the military. All right, we've sent people to catch a bucket of steam, to have an ID-10T form filled out, to requisition some relative bearing grease. The relative bearing, your relative bearing, if you're looking straight ahead, is 0, 90, 180, 270, right? But we told them to look for relative bearing grease, and they're searching all through engineering. It's kind of a way of occupying our time in creating a bond. It's that kind of humor that we share, and some darker humor that helps us cope with what we've seen and done. So we capitalize on that. We utilize that to create a safe space within our element so that we can share our dark stories and our dark humor as a coping mechanism. I'm pretty sure I'm well over my 10 minutes.
Great,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It took me a moment to get the ID-10T, but I like that very much. If you haven't gotten it yet, picture that looks like. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Shelby Arnold, who is staff psychologist specializing in forensic psychology at the Beck Institute for Cognitive Behavior Therapy. If you were with us last night and you got to hear from Stephen Fried, you heard a little bit about one of the founders, Aaron Tim Beck, that Stephen has just recently released an article about. Dr. Arnold provides at the Beck Institute provides training and consultation to systems, agencies, and teams across the country in recovery-oriented cognitive therapy. She received her PhD in clinical psychology with a concentration in forensic psychology from Drexel University. Her professional interests include alternatives to standard prosecution, like problem-solving courts, diversion programs, and improving implementation and dissemination of evidence-based and recovery-oriented care in forensic settings. Welcome, Dr. Arnold.
Hi, everybody. So as Rachel said, I work in forensic psychology, which is essentially just where the mental health sort of intersects with the criminal defense. And my role and a lot of my passions are about trying to get folks with serious mental health challenges out of the justice system as quickly as possible. So somewhere between 25 and 40% of individuals with serious mental health conditions come into contact with the justice system at some point. That's a huge number. It's a huge overrepresentation of this population. And despite that, I'm sure as you all see in the news often, our society and our justice system really fails this population, I think, both in terms of the care that they receive when they're in corrections and then in terms of supporting them. So what we often see, and this is especially true for folks with serious mental health challenges, is this sort of revolving door effect. So people don't get the care and rehabilitative services that they need while they're incarcerated. They come back out to the community. They're often not appropriately referred or supported in the community, and they kind of wind up circling through over and over. So I think we see in the news a ton how our system fails this population. And so what I was hoping to do today is to share with you a couple of ways that it doesn't. We're focusing on the present and the future of mental health care. So I was hoping to share some of the good news and some of the innovations and exciting things happening for this group of people who have historically really been kind of neglected in our system. So within forensic psychology, we talk about the idea that there are different sort of touch points or intercepts where people come into contact with the justice system. There's that initial moment of arrest, that initial contact with law enforcement, kind of moving through the process to court involvement, sentencing, trial, et cetera, to corrections, and then community. And there's this idea called the sequential intercept model, which is sort of a fancy way of saying that at each of these touch points, there are opportunities for diversion, meaning there's sort of a fork in the road, right? You could choose one path, which is the standard justice processing people sort of go through, the normal sort of idea we all have of what justice system involvement looks like. And then there's this other path where we can get people out of the justice system, into the community, connected to treatment, et cetera. So what I'm hoping to share with you is just two of those sort of touch points or intercepts and a couple of the ways that we're getting people out of this. So that first one is initial contact with law enforcement. So that initial arrest. again, this is, I think, kind of a hot button in the news. We see a lot of these interactions that get out very quickly. And so we don't often hear about some of the exciting or listening for folks.
We're just gonna boost our audio a bit.
Good, thank you. So I think one cool thing that's happening here that I know you might have read about over the summer is this national rollout of 988, which is an alternative to 911, specifically designed for folks with serious mental health challenges or who are experiencing any sort of mental health crisis. And I think this is a really exciting intervention for folks. It's giving people a choice, right? We don't have to call in law enforcement. We don't have to call 911, which has a lot of connotations for a lot of folks and can really kind of escalate situations in a way that they don't need to be. So 988 is actually a great way to prevent justice involvement altogether. We can call for somebody to talk to, somebody to refer to services, and then we don't even need law enforcement to come in the first place. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on 988, but I think that's a really great preventative option for a lot of our folks in this population. But for people who maybe do need emergency services dispatched, who do need someone to come to the scene, to come where they are. Maybe it's a matter of safety for them or for other people. There are also some really exciting innovations happening here too. So crisis intervention training is sort of the most common one we see. It's the one that you can do, I think, the least resources. And it's happening all over the country. I think 3,000 jurisdictions have some version of crisis intervention training now. And essentially it's just better training for our officers. It's usually run by mental health clinicians. They get education and a lot of personal stories and empathy building for folks with serious mental health challenges. They get a lot of training on de-escalation techniques to hopefully try to bring down some of these heated interactions that can happen. And then they get a lot of unique training on what's available in the community. So are there options that might be a better fit for this person than jail? And there almost always are. And so what are those options and how can we get people connected to them? CIT has a really robust program in Philly, actually, for folks who are local. It's been happening here since 2007. The trainings occur monthly for all new hires of the police department. So it's a really great thing that's happening here and across the country. And then building off of CIT, there's also a newer program called co-response teams. And so this actually embeds mental health clinicians into police departments and allows them to sort of be part of some of these interactions, again, to provide people with services and connection to resources when jail is not the option for them in that moment. So this can look really different, again, really dependent on the community's resources. Oftentimes it involves like ride-along, so the clinicians will sort of come to the scene with law enforcement, but sometimes it's done more by phone consultation, things like that. Philly is also rolling this out recently and actually is doing something very cool where Philly has not only mental health clinicians who will go out with police, but they have a mental health clinician embedded in the 911 dispatch center to help those initial people who receive the calls kind of figure out where the calls should go and if mental health resources need to be dispatched as well. So I think that's just a very cool innovation, especially here in our city. So those are sort of opportunities for diversion to try to get people from even getting arrested in the first place, to give people and first responders a choice of not bringing people to jail and connecting them with much more appropriate resources. But what about for the folks who are already arrested or who are already embedded in the justice system? So this is where mental health courts come in. This is sort of my favorite area of this work and where I've spent a lot of my time. So mental health courts rely on the idea of therapeutic jurisprudence, which is just a stupidly fancy legal term, basically saying that the justice system can have a therapeutic impact, and when it can, it should, and we can use evidence-based behavioral strategies to do so. So mental health courts kind of provide another option for folks, right? So we think about, you're at the point where you're charged with a crime, you can either plead guilty or you can go to trial. Mental health courts provide this third option, where people can take what's sort of considered an open plea, and they agree to do X number of months of treatment in the community, usually as an alternative to whatever sentence they're facing. And then the legal side sort of says, you know, we take this agreement, and if you successfully complete this, we agree to either drop your charges completely or significantly reduce your charges. So this is a really cool program for folks who can make it through their treatment mandate, because it really reduces a lot of those collateral consequences that come with justice involvement, right? We know that folks who end up in the justice system, when they're done, often have a lot of trouble with employment and housing and are really disconnected from the people that they had
in their corner before justice involvement, a lot of stigma, right? So if we can get people not involved in that in the first place and give them the opportunity to get connected to services, we really reduce those collateral consequences. The other piece about mental health courts that's really cool, I spent a lot of time sitting in different ones across the country, and they're just a really wonderful environment. It's the only place I've ever been in a courtroom and heard a lot of applause for people and heard a lot of support for people. The idea is that they're really team-based. They're non-adversarial. The judge, the prosecutor, and the defender are all on the same team, which is to help that person get what they need and be in the community as much as possible while they're doing it. So those are my sort of two different methods of diversion at two different really important touch points, I think, in our system. So just a couple of key takeaways. I know I'm running low on time. So I think in terms of getting people access to the services they need, I think diversion is the priority and the best way to do it. It keeps people out of the system and gets them connected to services much more quickly and keeps them in the community. We can do it at any point in a person's justice processing. It doesn't have to happen at moment one at arrest. We can do it, way later upon sentencing. And I think to do this, we really need a lot more collaboration from these two systems that have historically run parallel or often sort of in disconnection with each other. And so if we can get them to communicate and collaborate a little better in the interest of the person that they're serving, then we can see a lot more divergent opportunities. Thanks.
We were big fans of 988.
Yeah, 988.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arnold. Next, we are going to go to the end of the line, actually, to Dr. Paul Grant. Dr. Grant is the Director of Research, Innovation, and Practice at the Beck Institute Center for Recovery-Oriented Cognitive Therapy. With Tim Beck, who we heard about last night, he originated CTR and conducted foundational research to validate it. Dr. Grant developed group, family, and milieu CTR approaches and directs large projects implementing CTR nationally and internationally. He has developed innovative implementation tools and is involved in researching positive beliefs and team-wide culture change as mediators of successful CTR outcomes. He is the co-author of Recovery-Oriented Cognitive Therapy for Serious Mental Health Conditions and Schizophrenia, Cognitive Theory, Research, and Therapy. Please welcome Dr. Grant with me. And oh, nice, you moved the huddle pod already. That's wonderful. Thank you. And y'all in the audience, just like those who are online, if you're having any difficulty hearing anything, just let us know and we'll make a correction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very nice to be here. And with the huddle pod, I can't help but feel connected to you all. I want to tell you a Philadelphia story. It's some of what she said as the description. And Mark, I promise you, this is going to look a little bit more like what you do. It's, even though everything that it's just said about me makes it sound like I'm not what you do. I'm going to try to show you. Because our starting point is actually in the communities of Philadelphia. This work, both in terms of its inspiration and its evidence base, comes from the communities of color in the city, largely North Philadelphia and West Philadelphia. And we interviewed families, we interviewed affected individuals, we interviewed staff at various agencies that we partnered with to find out, well, what's working, and if we were going to try to do some innovation, what should it look like? And what we heard is kind of what you said. What we got out there isn't working. We need something else. And so I want to tell you about the something else. And I really think this is a Philadelphia story because it begins in Philadelphia, and it's better than the Moose in terms of the outcomes that it shows. So we developed an approach that, because I only got about 10 minutes to explain it to you, is really trying to, a lot of what we saw, and I think there's been some historical stuff. We've talked about some of the excitements of American psychiatry and others trying to address problems in many exciting ways. But we thought that the whole person approach was going to be much better because a lot of what seems to happen with mental health treatment and medical treatment for that matter, is very alienating for a lot of people. That doesn't naturally draw them in. They mistrust it for a lot of reasons. We thought if we expand the focus to the full person and not just sort of say, well, you're this person here, you got these problems, I'll help you with these problems. I look like I'm really good, you feel like less than me. We're all human beings. We got the problems, we got our assets. Let's sort of get a way of thinking about that. And I collaborated with Aaron Tim Beck. We'll call him Aaron Tim Beck. We'll call him that. Dr. Beck to us usually. And he invented a couple of theories that have really stood the test of time and are very valuable to us. And so that's our template for understanding a little bit how it is that people get stuck, what the problems are. And some of this stuff we're talking about is pretty challenging for anyone. If you're working with someone and they think that they're being persecuted, there's a chip in their head, they think they're being poisoned, they might believe that they're actually the Messiah and that they're going to help you. All of these things are kind of tricky to deal with. There's a whole literature full of that. How do we sort of get a way of connecting with them, get a way of sort of understanding what's going on for them, find out what they want, and then collaborate with them to get that. And so that's the Philadelphia story. We've been doing that in the city. I have to thank the former commissioner here, Arthur Evans. He was really instrumental. He's one of the early recovery people. You might know that the recovery movement actually began as a civil rights movement in the 60s, largely coming from the individuals who were in state hospitals and not feeling like they got any treatment. But he was involved in sort of moving it into policy and becoming part of policy. And so he invested heavily with us. And where we were focused is primarily the people who consume a lot of the resources and seem really stuck. So the people that used to be in Philadelphia State Hospital, if you're not from Philadelphia, we used to have the state hospital. They closed it, opened what are called extended acute units, and those became the new state hospital. So we moved in there because that wasn't changing. So we applied programming there to help people get out of that setting and into the community. Well, what happens when they're community? How do you help the continuity so they can get the life they want? ACT teams, assertive community treatment teams. So they needed to be a part of this. And then you needed to bring housing in because people move into housing. And that's oftentimes when, as Arthur would say, people plateau. We're going great, we've got all these programming going, and all of a sudden the person's in their own housing. And well, now what? So giving a framework, so it's now what, it's continuing. And it's what you talked about. It's really helping find out what the person's best self is, the part of themselves that they find most valuable. What is their mission on this earth in some sense, in their terms? What is the life that they want to be having? And how can we collaborate with them to get that? You might have to plug some things in from, classic psychiatry or medicine or something like that, but you plug it in for that because you want to help the kids, because you want to start a business, because you want to, volunteer, you want to start a family, whatever it is that is so powerful. Then we're not fighting about this, that, or the other thing. We're trying to get the life that you want to be having. And so there's a broad network. We were just actually, we do every year, we do a celebration of the success that the people in this network, because we now have a network in the city for this. They come from sort of, shall we say, all the levels of care. As one of the individuals with lived experience put it to me so beautifully, you all describe this as you're stepping down. We're stepping up. We're in this really restrictive level of care. And each level we go up, we're stepping up. We're stepping into freedom. We're stepping into the life that we want. So this upward pathway to the things we want. We have people from all over the parts of that. The unfortunate, as Shelby was talking about, the much more restrictive aspects of it to where you really are free to live in your life. And as someone who used to work with us said, our dream is for everyone to leave care completely. And that might sound pretty, maybe that's what the future is linked up to, but we all have problems. And I think that this group of people we've been focusing on, they're often seen as lifers. Like they always have to be in care. They always have to do this kind of thing. And I don't think that that's true, and we'll see, and that's the link to the future. But this model from Philadelphia, which I haven't done a very good job of describing to you, we have replicated it in New York State. So we are doing something similar up there, even though their health system is organized differently. And we just set up a collaboration with the state of New Jersey to do the same thing. So sometimes beautiful things that happen in Philadelphia can go other places and blossom in their various ways. So maybe I'll stop there, even though I don't know that it made any sense, but I tried.
I picked up what you're laying, so we're good.
And I didn't even have to wear the shorts.
Right. Although I think you'd look great in it.
I might. I would happily
Have
wear
a
it.
hat.
Thank you very much, Dr. Grant. We are now going to hear from Lamya Broussard, senior clinician from the Uplift Center for Grieving Children here in Philadelphia. Lamya is a dedicated, certified, trauma-informed senior clinician at Uplift who has been in the field for more than a decade. She's honored to have worked with and to continue providing therapeutic healing support to marginalized communities, including youth in foster care, Black and brown immigrants, LGBTQIA+ homeless youth, BIPOC frontline advocates and juvenile justice involved youth impacted by compounded grief and trauma. She's earned her bachelor's degree in psychology from Tuskegee University and her master's in social services and law and social policy from Bryn Mawr Graduate School of Social Work and Social Research, with a specialization in child and family well-being. Social services is Lamya's life purpose, as she enjoys helping others navigate their healing process. As a school and community services senior clinician, Lamya facilitates weekly grief groups to students grieving within Philadelphia schools, including public charter, private, and parochial, and has also co-developed and implemented Uplift's curriculum and activities for justice-involved youth. Additionally, she's represented Uplift at Dougie Center's Grief Out Loud podcast, radio stations, national symposiums, panels, and school district trainings, including Philly Trauma Conference, Central Texas Grief Symposium, and Board of Education of Fayette County, Kentucky School District. Lamya continues to provide grief and trauma healing advocacy to uplift children, families, and students. She's been a member of the Alliance of Black Social Workers since 2010 and is the founder director of Coming Out More Equipped Consulting Services, or COME, which engages with other community-based organizations. Join me in welcoming Lamya.
Thank you so much. So I am actively grieving now as I realize that my parking meter no longer extends. Plus, I'm hoping that my car is still there. So forgive me if you all see me checking my phone, but that's a part of grief as well. As long as my car is there, I'm good. I can take care of a ticket. But I am from Uplift Center for Grieving Children, as said. Thank you so much for having me here. And I'm so appreciative to be on this panel with my co-panelists. So what I do at Uplift is, as mentioned, I'm a senior clinician there, and I work with our students in Philadelphia, all throughout Philadelphia, as we say, our K through 2, our littles all the way up to high school, as well as worked in the communities with our juvenile justice involved youth and our queer and trans youth. And our approach at Uplift is we are very much peer-based support, therapeutic peer-based support groups. We're not therapy, but it's very therapeutic. We have been able to provide groups and services at this point already in the school year to almost 200 students and about 20 different school partners. We are very much about non-pathologizing grief, making sure too, because grief is universal. Grief impacts all of us, every last one of us at this table, in this room, in the world. Although we know that society has oftentimes stigmatized grief or has made grief something that is not normal. And even as Dr. Alan Wolfeld, who is one of our grief experts in the field that we follow, his model of the 6 reconciliation needs for mourning children, have spoke deeply about even how a lot of our youth and children are kind of known as the forgotten mourners. And so I have had the opportunity to be able to work with our youth. We work with, majority of the youth we work with are Black and Latino. As we know, that's a representation of the school district of Philadelphia. And they have done an amazing job with actually engaging their grief in ways that adults have not even done it. And I can't stress that enough, how much I commend them. This is volunteer. You do not have to do this. This is during the school day. If you all can think about and imagine, you know, if it would have been you in high school or in middle school, elementary, and having to go do a grief group, right? And although we do that in a very developmental level, appropriate level, so we do that through activities, we do that through games, we do that through discussion. But after the pandemic, we have really innovated our practices to really fit what works with that particular group. So a lot of times students will come into group and they kind of like look in, and you can see them kind of, you know, apprehensive. And then by the end of group, especially after the first group where we do this game, Big Wind Blows, they are like, Miss, I love this. Like, I thought this was going to be depressing and crying and sad. And we say all those are welcome as well. And sometimes groups can look like that. However, we really believe in meeting their developmental level. and meeting them exactly where they are. We really value choice and agency. One of our grief group agreements is you can always say, I pass. We get tested on that a lot. That is one of the agreements that most of the students enjoy so much, and really differentiates our groups from a lot of different groups, meaning we can have students come and put their head down, put a hoodie on, not say anything. The fact that they're there and they're coming week after week, we welcome that. We are totally separate from the school. We are not a part of the school district. The school district is one of our highly valued partners, as well as other partners. CHOP is one of our partners, as well as the Eagles. Whoop, whoop. No judgment if you're not an Eagles fan. Yes, I'm gonna try not to break out the whole Eagles song. But we've also, partnered Arizona State University, because we provide family-based services, which are all free. I have information too, if anyone wants any information. Our services are free, free, free. I cannot say that enough. They're genuinely free. And so we have family-based services. Those right now are virtual groups, and where families can come. You have adults do their own groups. You have the students do their groups with their age appropriate, with their other peers, their age group. And then I work in the school and community side. And so we do school and community groups. So we go to the schools and we go and provide these 6-week groups. The family services groups are 5. We also have queer and trans services. We also have bilingual services. And then we also was able to, during the pandemic, so proud to say that we were able to come up with a Hope Line. I don't know if anyone here has heard of the Hope Line, Philly Hope Line. Awesome. And so it's a free number. You can call it. It's a 833-745-4673. It's Monday through Thursdays, 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Fridays, 1 to 4. Holidays were closed, but we have special hours for bilingual. We have special hours for queer and trans. It's free grief and emotional support. It's real. I staff it on Mondays, 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., as well as my other colleagues. But we were a part of creating this Philly Hope Line during the pandemic to really be able to offer that kind of emotional grief support, warm handoffs if it is any mental health crises that occur. But we've been able to do that. And since its inception in 2020, at the end of July 2022, we had already had over 800 calls. And so I'm very grateful. I absolutely love working at Uplift, and absolutely, love being able to provide these services. Grief, the last I will say in closing, is grief is not trauma, but grief can be traumatic. Grief is not necessarily not mental illness. Grief is very normal. However, a lot of the different losses that we work with, I will say when it comes to mental health, when it comes to even the Hearing Voices this whole conference and looking at, those that were in asylums, those are some of the types of grief that we work with in terms of disenfranchised grief that is invalidated by society. And so that can look anywhere from an empty nester could be a disenfranchised grief. That can look anywhere from the loss of humanity, your loss of dignity, your loss of safety, just like many that were in a part of the inpatient process. And just imagine how much more marginalized that is when you're Black and when you are also brown. And so we deal with different types of, mostly our groups and our services are for those who've had someone die. But when the pandemic happened, and especially working with our queer and trans youth who, because of simply the way that they identify, a lot of family relationships and connections have ended. And so we have also been able to embrace and work with around ambiguous loss. And that is basically losses that's not due to death, but it can feel like a death. They can be there physically, but they're absent or opposite. So that could be incarceration, that could be inpatient, many other types of losses. And so I will be glad to share more detailed information afterwards, flyers, information that I have. And I'm again so glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Finally, we're going to hear from Dr. Cagande, who is the Division Chief of the Community Care and Wellness Program at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. For the non-Philadelphians, we refer to this as CHOP, You hear someone saying something that sounds like CHOP. That is our children's hospital, and it is phenomenal. That's why some of us decide to stay in this city when otherwise we might have wanted to quit it long ago. Dr. Cagande earned her degree in Bachelor Arts from Rutgers University in New Brunswick and her medical degree from Cebu Institute of Medicine in Cebu, Philippines. She trained in general psychiatry at the Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, Cooper University Hospital in Camden, New Jersey. She did a child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship at Johns Hopkins University Hospital. She was a residency training director for 12 years, a psychiatry medical school course and clerkship director, and invited speaker nationally and internationally, published articles, authored book chapters, and editor of a textbook on positive psychiatry, psychology, and psychotherapy, focusing on wellness and resiliency. She's currently chief of the Division of Community Care and Wellness and senior associate program director and fellowship advisor in the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at CHOP. She is also an associate professor of psychiatry at Perelman School of Medicine of the University of Pennsylvania. Her areas of interest are anxiety, depression, trauma, school mental health, integrated collaborative care, positive psychiatry, and cultural psychiatry. Welcome, Dr. Cagande.
Thank you. I want to first attest to Uplift's wonderful, wonderful service, because we have turned to you and referred for a lot of our children who, especially in Philadelphia with the trauma and the gun violence and losses there, and also from our school-based mental health. I know we referred to you, but thank you. I want to just, my role is going to be to give you a little background of the youth mental health crisis and what CHOP is doing. First, to give you a sense of the crisis, 1 in 6 of children between ages of 2 and 8 have a diagnosed mental, behavioral, or developmental disorder. And evidence also shows the situation is worse for for children of color who've been disproportionately affected, especially by the pandemic. Now, talking about the pandemic, the impact of that has amplified the mental health crisis. Before the pandemic, we've always had a youth mental health crisis, but it's just escalated with increasing rates of mental health emergencies, including suicide among children. In a recent regional community health needs assessment that CHOP participated in, it found that mental health was ranked #1 out of 12 identified community health needs, above access to care, above chronic disease prevention and management, and substance use. Further, for the youth, specifically, mental health was cited as by half of them as the largest challenge or barrier to health in their communities. These local trends are consistent with the national trends that show high rates of depression among youth and adults, frequent mental distress and suicide mortality and suicidal ideation, and even attempts among youth. CHOP is committed to helping children access necessary mental and behavioral health treatment and services, ensuring that all children, especially the most vulnerable and those marginalized, live healthy, productive lives and can experience the wonders of childhood that they're capable of. CHOP is making an investment to address the urgent behavioral health crisis, and I'm going to go through what we are doing. So our Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, which was a mouthful, I know, so we actually call it DCABS. We like acronyms. So our department is expanding our integrated behavioral health program called Healthy Minds, Healthy Kids, where behavioral health specialists are working in primary care practices to offer support in patients' medical home, meeting where the children and the families are at. And the goal of this program is prevention and early intervention. We have also partnered with Girard College, which is a boarding school here in Philadelphia. It's actually not a college, it's from 1st grade to 12th grade. There's a history of the Girard College, is well known here in Philadelphia. We provide behavioral health care via telehealth and on-site consultation and treatment for students at that school. And that actually developed for them reaching out because they did their own internal assessment that 80% of their students have at least experienced trauma in their life. So we are also providing that trauma-informed care, which was one of their needs. again, meeting where they're at in the community. And we plan to develop similar programs at other schools in the future in an effort to break down the barriers to mental health services. We have a new Center for Advanced Behavioral Health Care, which is at 4601 Market Street. It was our outpatient division. And it's really an important part of CHOP's ongoing plan to address the mental health care crisis, especially in that region. Its goal is to increase access to ambulatory behavioral health care, including trauma clinic, as well as family therapy. In addition to outpatient services, we also will have a partial hospitalization program. Next year, I'm excited to also announce that in 2023, CHOP will open a 24-hour, 7 days crisis response center and 2 licensed psychiatry inpatient units. It's on Cedar Avenue. It's in, for those who are from Philadelphia, there's this Mercy Hospital there. So we will have our inpatient and crisis center there. It will be the first time in more than 20 years that CHOP has dedicated inpatient units to treat children and youth with mental health needs. I had the honor really of listening to the presentations this morning, especially the history of psychiatry, talking about it, you know, how asylums and how patients were treated. You know, moving forward, and we do learn from the past, moving forward, this is really going to be a state-of-the-art inpatient unit with a lot of lights, a huge recreational area for kids to also, you know, they're in the hospital. They're going to feel like they're in prison. We want them to feel as part of their recovery and mental health healing as normal as possible as well. So it's really exciting. And actually, I should mention that our Center for Advanced Behavioral Health, our outpatient center, is also state-of-the-art, high ceiling, very brighter than this room, and huge windows, because we know, especially in the winter seasons, light is very important. But anyways, so I digress on that. But I think what's important to point out too is that we really invited the community to give us input in these facilities, which is important, and which we were talking about how community is important. And I also want to stress, though, that our services are patient-centered, family-centered as well. We engage the families in every service that we have, because who are the ones that are living with them 24 hours? It's their families. We still have a lot to do. We need a bigger, and you know the cliche of it takes a village to raise a child, but we need really a big village to raise each child. And we need to call on our government leaders to advocate for mental health and bring about changes to payment structures that support the full continuum of care that our department is doing for the necessary care to address the mental, emotional, and behavioral distress our children continue to face. We also need preventive programs that will promote resiliency and wellness and foster positive mental health, not only in the children, but also in the families and their community. And yeah, actually end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists here. And I have a feeling lots of folks have thoughts and questions they would like to share, but too bad I'm going first. I wanted to ask a question of all of our panelists right now. If they could identify one change that you believe would have a meaningful, positive impact on the community that you currently support, and how or why. And whoever wants to answer first may do so. Just I ask that you bring the huddle pod to that whoever's speaking and put it in front of them.
Well, I guess it's in front of me. I'll go first. Right? If you don't mind, unless someone wants it.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the key words we've been hearing a lot all day is community. And with your theme of voice, I think we need to listen to the voice of the community. That said, the one change that I believe really is to improve our partnership with the community, especially CHOP's partnership with the community partners like Uplift. This really involves working together, communicating together what their needs are and the resources that are lacking and what the issues are, and developing and implementing, programs, evidence-based programs, especially trauma-informed care in these communities that are accessible and feasible. Because I think someone mentioned it earlier, one size does not fit all. So we really need to kind of get a sense of what the community needs and what evidence base that we could provide to them. So, I think to combat, again, the barriers, the lack of access and especially stigma, we need a stronger community partnership. That would be something that I would really like to change. My one change in a lot of boards.
Great, thank you. What's up? Did you want to?
After you.
Okay, I was thinking since I'm right here as well.
Yeah, okay.
Let me get it out the way. Yes, as I mentioned, grief is universal. Grief, having someone die in our life is universal. It impacts all of us. With that being said, with us working in my area, with the schools, I would say something I would really love to see is grief-informed schools, as well as just like trauma-informed, but that it is so a part of the culture that when it comes to students grieving or dealing with grief, and even the faculty and the staff and the adults in the building, be able to have that space. They are definitely schools that utilize our wonderful trainer, who is also my director, have done, 1,000+ PDs, but being able to make it accessible across the board, a part of the curriculum, a part of the training, and training, like I said, that allows the principal, the staff, the teachers to be able to really receive the training for themselves and what they need to be able to be even more prepared for the students. I think that would be lovely to see, and then eventually even see it go from schools, but see it be a part of even other systems, because grief is something that we all experience, but yet it's so tabooed in society. Thank you. Okay.
So I have a bit of a unique perspective here, because the majority of speakers that I've heard over the past 24 hours almost have been coming at it as these are services that we provide to the community. But I represent a community. And my community feels like we're not being heard. We're being over-medicated. We're being under-resourced. I don't care how much money is thrown, the resources aren't there. And on top of all that, we're battling stigmas. Number one is the stigma of just a veteran. When we go out in civilization, the stigma of a veteran is conservative, hostile, argumentative, just belligerent. And on top of that, if you say a veteran with PTS, then we're pariahs. We can't get jobs. We can't make money, which, although money doesn't cure everything, it sure helps. But when we have a diagnosis of PTS, which in our minds, PTS is just a way of describing the way our minds are trying to cope in the healthiest manner we can with the things that we've seen and done. It's not that we have that our brains changed. Our brains that grew up in civilian world became military, and now we're trying to become civilian again. And we're trying to reconcile the things that we did when we were in the military. It's not a disease, it's not a disorder. It's our brain trying to reconcile what we've done. So when you add the stigmas together, we feel that labels are being placed on us without without anybody hearing us shouting. So if I could change something, it's how we're viewed. Sorry.
Yeah, I think mine builds off of that. I think when we're talking about folks with serious mental health challenges who end up in the justice system, I think there's often sort of this community perception that maintains the status quo. I think there's a lot of fear, a lot of stigma, a lot of systemic racism that happens that makes communities fearful of trying something new. And so we just stick with the way our justice system has been. And I think especially when it concerns potential matters of safety, people are just really fearful of trying something different and trying something that might keep people in the community more and get people actually what they need and living the lives they want to be living. And so I think if I could have a magic wand here, which would be really lovely. So if you could get on that, Rachel, that'd be great. I think, really trying to reshape public perceptions. I think just with serious mental health challenges alone, I think there's this huge misconception that those folks are the ones that are constantly committing crimes, when actually the research tells us over and over again that they're much more likely to be victims than they are to perpetrate any of those crimes. But I think it's that stigma and that fear and misperception that really keeps people from trying something new and trying to keep people out in the community. So.
Can I just piggyback on that real
Sure.
quick? I'm sorry. I did want everyone to take note of something, and you mentioned racism in your comments. One of the most amazing things that I've seen about our organization and the community that we've created, we have people of color, we have Caucasian, we have Jews, Muslim, Christians, atheists, we have Asians, Latinos, Latinx. I'm sorry, I'm 47. I'm trying to stay up. We have LGBTQ, we have hetero, it doesn't matter. The only thing that we care about is that we're veterans. And I think the byproduct of that is that we've actually created a community that we wish the rest of the world would be. Sorry.
Thank you. We'll pass that down to Dr. Grant. We're just going to have another response to that question, and then we'll open it up to the room.
What I just heard gentlemen say, I think this is our tension, right? We have communities that have identities, but we're all human beings. So the question is, how do we kind of do both of those things? Because people's differences are important, and it's important that we acknowledge them. But this higher thing you're talking about, where we've sort of had stuff we're working on, we're all human beings, we've all got families, we've all got relationships, we've all got purposes, all that kind of stuff. I think there's a cool tension there that they could really work. And I think what seems to happen is we go one way where people don't feel heard, that's the name of this thing, or we go the other direction and we're fighting. So it's interesting. And maybe that leads into what I was I had a very interesting experience this morning. We're doing a project in the state of New Jersey where we've been training people who are peer specialists to do, if you have peer specialists, people with lived experience. It actually is as old as anything else since you were studying history. Some of the early examples of this go all the way back to Pinel, back into the 1790s. You can see examples, really great care that was done by people with experience. And Pinel knew to entrust them with that. There's other things wrong with him. We don't have to talk about that. But I think that it's been codified a little bit more recently by the government and things of that sort. But there's still a kind of approach to care, an approach to working with another human being that has a relatable sort of, shall we say, suffering, things they've been through. I think some of the veteran thing we were just talking about is like that. When I listened to, because we were training them to enhance their, really their reach with some of the stuff that we know how to do, that we've learned here in Philadelphia. But it wasn't teaching them how to be human beings. It wasn't any of that. It was just, okay, you've got somebody who's got a whole life experience, all the traumas and different things, the griefs, I like putting it that way, that make it hard for them to connect with you. How can you still connect with them, find some of the meaning they want to have, and move forward? And that was what we got. And as I was listening to the people who were sharing, because the question that we posed is, tell us about one success that you had doing this, so that everyone could hear just what that was like. And I had this thought that's kind of echoing some of the things that we thought about here, if people with this background were more or less in charge of care, things could be a bit different in a way. Right now, we have, it largely falls under a medical auspices and also legal one. And a lot of times the people who have the lived experience are kind of plugged in here, and not clear where they're supposed to go. But it was clear to me that they have their eyes on the prize. If they had more authority in this situation, if they could speak to this, then you see that somebody with lived experience is just like you. And we all have the things that we deal with. Two, they would be able to bring some of that humanity to the care, because I think a lot of stuff that I see when it's not working out, and this is no offense to the psychiatrists on the board here, is sometimes a disconnect between the understanding of the guild and the understanding of the people. And I think that can produce some of the stuff that we've seen. We've worked with people who've been stuck in facilities for 5 full decades in this kind of misunderstanding. So I'm not suggesting, I'm not arguing for a revolution like in 1790 where you're going to completely, but it just occurs to me that if people who had lived experience who, because they're developing their guild now, but if they were to have more say in care, and if their voice was as loud as the other voices and respected more, that could maybe have a huge difference for several of these things. Again, I think it really could address stigma, because you could say, I know some people they've had it really, really bad. They've been in restraints. They've had their freedom taken away from them, and they've been able to step up, as we said, and into something that is really amazing. And I feel like their story should be known. Just because you've been given one of these diagnoses, because people think you're crazy, all of a sudden you can't be a human being, you can't have the life that you want, and then people are afraid of you. And so I think that maybe I want to be clear, I don't think any one thing is going to do it, but that occurred to me that could be something that might be worth thinking about.
I am going to, I'm actually going to join you all at the table, because I didn't realize that I've probably been making the online audience a little nauseous, because the cameras had to bounce back to me and here and me and here. So I'm going to join you all here, if I may. And Sophia's got the huddle pod, and she'll, did you have a question there? We've got another question here, and Allison will let us know if there's some coming in from online. Thank you.
Well, first, I want to thank Mr. Herzog for your service to our country. I'm a Navy veteran myself, so things that you were talking about are very real for veterans. If it wasn't for organizations like you have and for Wounded Warrior Project, many, many more veterans would have committed suicide. The government is not doing hardly anything for our veterans once they come back disabled, except for the initial time that, Walter Reed Hospital. After that, they're on their own. It's not for organizations like he has and Wounded Warrior Project. We would have tens of thousands more veterans committed suicide. So that's a very important point to make. And everyone in this room should contact our congressman and senator and tell them to put more money into taking care of our veterans today. Thank you.
I would like to piggyback on that and say that there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of veteran organizations and nonprofits out there all trying to help us. I would caution you all to do your due diligence before supporting any of them, specifically with regard to how they spend their money. Irreverent Warriors boasts a 94% nonprofit rating, which means 94% of all the money we raise goes to our mission. We have 2 full-time paid staff members, and we're very proud of that rating. Not all of them will be able to boast anything close to that. So before you support any other veteran organizations, please do your due diligence.
So I will stand up so people can hear me. So thank you so much for the creating this space. So I'm notorious for making broad questions, open-ended questions, and I think I'm gonna do it today again. So yeah, please bear with me. So I'm a historian in training. So I finished my PhD dissertation in 2020 during the COVID was raging. And so my dissertation was about trying to capture the lived experiences of being institutionalized during the post-World War II era. So I did that, and then now I'm at the point that I should be writing my book. And I've been saying that to everyone. It's a public knowledge now, but anyway. So I'm trying to do that. So as a historian, I'm in the camp that I really have to ask so what question. So what does something happen in the past can contribute to the present society now? And then I think I got the sense that we are in a kind of crisis. We have to be doing something. So what can I do as a historian? That's what I've been thinking. So here's the question. So what, as a professional, as a personal human being, what do you want me, a historian, to do in my work? What you don't want me to do? You can answer that one as well, but what do you want me to do?
And whoever wants to answer can just tap the help button. I'm just going to grab it myself real quick, because we were just having a conversation, a few of us over dinner last night, about our relatives who are veterans and who fought in World War II and what that experience looked like when they came back and what it looked like to us as their children and grandchildren. And it's one of those veterans that inspired this show for myself, and the experiences that he had during his own PTS experiences, I guess, and how negative they were and how much it changed him as a human being. So I appreciate the work that you're doing very much, and I'm very curious about it. And I also would love to hear what the folks here would like to see the historians who are studying the past do or not do to make a positive impact going forward. Anyone can speak to that?
I feel like I was going to let someone maybe more specific to the focus, but if you ask in general. So I will say what is so important when you are capturing history, which I'm sure you already know clearly because you have attained something that I can only imagine, is just making sure to include everyone's story. Everyone's perspective, everyone's point of view. That does not always happen. A lot of the students I work with and see, majority, a lot of that does not happen. And I believe it was a TED Talk that was very popular, and I may be misquoting the title, but it was the problem of a single story. So I thought of that when you asked that question, is because as we know, World War II and a lot of the wars impacted many different, and many were involved, but not all the time when history is being publicized or being shared includes the demographic of everyone. And so I would just add that.
So at the beginning of my supposed to be 10 minutes, I talked about crossroad events. They're moments that people tend to hear the call of patriotism or the call to service. Yesterday was Pearl Harbor Day. And immediately after Pearl Harbor happened, there was a huge uptick in enlistments, right? And then those veterans had to come home. Those service members had to come home. And as Stephen told us last night, 4 years after World War II ended, there was a creation of the National Institute of Mental Health, right? And then at the next crossroad and the next crossroad, there are upticks in enlistment, all right? In 91, there was an uptick in enlistment when Iraq invaded Kuwait. And then they had to come home. But they didn't have it so bad because we were so fast in accomplishing the mission of removing Iraq from Kuwait. And then September 11th happened. And that was a significant crossroad event. And it seems like everybody forgot that our service members had to come home. That's how we feel, at least. So as a historian, I might ask you to take a look at the correlation between crossroad events and mental health, advancements afterwards, and see if you can pinpoint when ours is supposed to come. Now, as a non-historian, I would tell you, even though Irreverent Warriors events, their signature events, the Silkies hikes are veteran only, we could always use civilian volunteers. And we could always use funding. So if you have the means, or if you have friends with means, please suggest that they donate. If you don't have the means, please come out and support us. We have safety vehicles for non-veterans to ride in, hand out water, hand out snacks, make sure that we're cared for, and really help us to accomplish our mission. We wouldn't be able to do it without you. So.
My husband is a big fan of donating and always gets, I think you guys give out bandanas or something in the
We
mail
do.
for donating. So we have a collection of them. I want to thank you for a question. So I've been thinking about it while everyone's talking. As a historian, and I did get a chance to talk to you earlier. Patients' stories, family stories are so important. I think what I would ask is, as you write, look at each story, look for that glimmer of hope in each story, because I feel like a lot of stories do end really, end. A family will talk about a relative or a friend that died of suicide. So I think to include stories that have hope, that give people hope, because I think that's important, as well as, whether they died of suicide or suffered from a mental illness or was institutionalized. I think we need to that's what I would suggest.
Can I offer one additional answer? As a historian, I'll just suggest trying to write the histories of all the amazing people who do such incredible work. So whether, anyway, in the past, just like the panel. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. I had kind of a synthesis question listening to the panel from this morning and then right now. The kind of, I think, challenge with, whether that is the justice system, whether that's working with veterans, youth, and all these different groups, is the question of the space itself, where like they need a space to gather. But then thinking about the veterans, you said, we are the community. And so, I think maybe like that model where it's like, even if whichever group it is, that sense that they are the network versus, the space. Which one do we prioritize in social services is always very interesting to me. And I asked this question, I'm a literary critic by training, and I'm also a community organizer. And one thing that I love to do is to bring people together around literature, whether that's youth, whether that is seniors, whether that's, folks facing different sorts of issues in their lives. And so I guess the flip side of the question is, and that is also like, literature can be very powerful for, for example, addressing moral questions. If, you're dealing with justice issues, veterans, dealing with experiences that are universal, and, different things young people are facing. So what role can literature play? is one. And how can it build these kind of supple communities that are beyond the space, even though the space is so important, like the hospital space or wherever it is for that initial, point of contact. But then how do they create these lasting bonds, which I think is so important as well.
We can start with this one. Yeah. I think that's such a good question. I have spent a lot of time working with justice involved folks in a lot of different capacities. So in many moons ago, teaching literature and theater in prisons, and then also a little bit more recently in my clinical roles doing a lot of group therapy. And I think the vibes are very different across both. I think getting people who have been released into the community after incarceration to come to a group therapy is really hard. It's not appealing to them in a lot of ways. They don't think it'll help them. They think it's very clinical. And it is, and I understand that. And I think the buy-in is really challenging. Getting people to come talk about a book or write something or create something together is much easier. It's a shared mission. It's a sense of community. And I think it provides a little bit of distance from some of the challenges that people feel sort of like entrenched in. And so I love the use of the arts to do that. When I was teaching theater in prison, people were reading a lot of literature and then creating a play at the end of their semester together. And it was their chance to get to come together on something, to get to create something, to feel a sense of accomplishment, to have something that they're proud of, to contribute something good to the people who are watching their play. So I think as much as we can use literature and the arts to kind of create those positive emotions, people, I think that's even more therapeutic than the sort of clinical group therapy that I was doing later in my career. So.
With all the gun violence that we have, what can we do to have, as a journalist, we have to talk, to have mental health not become the scapegoat? Yeah. The go-to issue. What can we, just as regular people, not buy newspapers, not tune in, where can our power come from?
No, no, go ahead. No, I'm gonna let you go, but I wanted to, you mean to not, when you say scapegoat, you mean to not make it like they have a mental health issue.
This
Absolutely.
We don't have to, plus,
Mental health.
The assumption, oh, he must be
Absolutely.
disturbed or have mental
Or a
health
veteran.
history.
Hmm.
I think just doing what you're doing right now, telling people, what's the evidence? I mean, the evidence is, yeah, the majority of those who actually commit crime don't have a history or don't have mental illness. So yeah, I think just talking about that, continue to call that out when people say it, whether in public or among your peers, because yeah, among peers too, we'll talk about that.
Well, and it has such a negative connotation with respect to funding, well.
Then you get into the political. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, this someone else want to answer? Yeah, so one of the models in social work is Bronfenbrenner's ecological systemic model that I have appreciated so much because it looks at a child in their micro level, their macro level, their meso, many different systems that impacts and informs how a child develops. And so I would say that is very important, whether you are a social worker or any professional in a social service field, even just as you said, as a regular human being able to look at things beyond the surface level, I think is so important, and looking at the macro level of what systems are informing a lot of what we're seeing. So even meaning, when we talk about a lot of the gun violence that we see, that is very real. And I see most of the stories on the news, I end up interfacing with those students in group that we do at Uplift, or even in the work I do outside of Uplift. So it's very real. But what I will say too is that a lot of it is very systemic. When you are at a loss of support, of services, of resources, of money, of being heard, of being valued. Violence is very common that will be a trauma response, or will be a disparity response, if you will. And so being able to see that in more than okay, well, this is because of only this happened in our mental health. Some of it is, it's trying to survive. It's the system, it's the political landscape of a lot of things, of how things are set up. As we hearing a lot about veterans, if you're setting up a system that does not support veterans coming home to reintegrate, it doesn't take rocket science to understand that then you are creating, doesn't take evidence to have to show a whole study. You're creating likelihoods that will have very negative outcomes if not prepared to be able to reintegrate on many different levels. Not a veteran, but that's just a common to me.
I have to ask for caution
Mhm.
on this topic. First off, Irreverent Warriors is completely apolitical. We don't make political statements.
Mhm.
I will tell you that even without me being properly integrated into society, when I came home, the only time that I fired a weapon at another human being was while I was in service.
Mhm.
I own firearms.
Mhm.
Please don't assume that veterans are likely to go to be the new postal workers, so to speak,
Sure, sure.
right? Just because we're veterans does not mean we're going to engage in mass shootings.
Absolutely.
And the likelihood is no greater for that than it is for anybody else.
Absolutely.
There are there's countless numbers of veterans out there. And the thing that crushes our souls is that when there's a mass shooting, the first question everybody asks is, were they a veteran? That's incredibly hurtful to us. And it's uncalled for, truthfully. So I beg for caution on that.
So let me clarify my position. I certainly was not talking about violence. When I'm speaking, I'm talking about many different choices or decisions that have been made that have often not been considered at a larger ecological system issue. Definitely understand that. Personally, that's not even something that runs across my mind, even with me not being a veteran, having family that are veterans, but I don't go to that in my head. So I understand, and I think that's very valuable. Please hear me, that was not what I was answering to the violence.
I understand.
And that applies as well. You know, I think it's important because a lot of, you know, the students that we work with and who have been victims of being harmed and violence, a lot of times the larger context is not considered. So that's what I was trying to say with that.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for all that you folks do. Just 2 points. One, how many beds are you going to have, doctor, when you create that? I'm just a
Honestly,
social
not
worker
enough, but
asking.
it's about more than zero. It's 46.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Second question. As you know, next year is a big political year in Philly. In fact, all the city councilmen and the 3 million people are running for mayor here. Well, it's not 3, it's 8 or 9 or 10. Any case, what would you, if you had those folks in here, all the city council presidents, city council members, and people who want to be on the city council, and all the folks who want to be mayor, how would you approach them? What would you want them to do in terms of mental health? Because all politicians, from the twice impeached, other guy, and people to the left are talking about mental health, taking care of a lot of issues, mental health professionals. But what would you really want to hear from them? Would you want them to implement, and when they got in office, in terms of mental health for the city and county of Philadelphia, in terms of the quality of life for folks? connected to mental health. Do you follow that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, you know, when we're planning for programs or services, you have to talk about money. You have to talk about funding in order to provide them. There's a shortage of behavioral health specialists, actually. You know, I would ask them to support the pipeline, the education, the social work, nursing, physicians, as well as funding these programs that are evidence-based and have proven to work within the community, but, you know, helping the community also to be funded themselves, you know, kind of sharing the end of the rainbow pot type of thing. So yeah, that's how I would really give them the evidence and all the data. They want data, we have it. And sometimes that data goes one ear and out the other. We just have to keep persisting. And I think that's one thing that a lot of us here, especially in this panel, just keep persisting, fighting and not advocating for mental health, despite the history.
I also think to add to that, not only funding mental health, but I think funding a lot of the stuff that sort of surrounds that, like employment and housing and all these support services, because I think I've worked with a lot of folks who understand that they might need some help with their mental health and are also in survival mode and just can't even focus on it. And so I think if we could sort of scaffold all of the other stuff, they might be able to create a little bit more space to address some of those mental health needs.
And to add, and just to continue to that too, there's evidence that the social determinants are a huge factor of a lot of families and people, you know, either unemployment or lack of desert food, you know, whether it causes mental illness or not, I'm not going to say all that causes mental illness, but psychologically it's distressing. So a lot of support and targeting those social determinants is going to
Things like that child tax credit, the money we're getting, well, that money folks got for families for a couple of years that was cut off by some people.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we are at time. And I don't want us to run over because I am mindful of Lamya's parking situation. Having recently gotten a ticket that was completely unwarranted, but there it is. So I wanted to say thank you to all of our attendees and particularly to all of our participants, our speakers. This has been a multi-year project with the exhibition as well as planning this. And I'm getting teary because this was really meaningful to me as a way to make the work that we do here at the Library Company every day relevant and to hope that it can have an impact on what's going on today in the world. You know, sometimes I think as historians and people who work in history, particularly since 2020, a lot of us feel like, is what I'm doing worthwhile when we see people being hurt and dying and struggling and wanting to make a positive impact. And sometimes maybe we feel as though what we're doing isn't enough. So we take opportunities like this to try to make it feel more meaningful. I, for one, am very moved by everything that I've heard here, and particularly what I've been hearing in this panel. I appreciate the opportunity that the Library Company has given us to sort of to hear these ideas and maybe cross-pollinate some. One thing that keeps striking me is I would love to see the folks from Marc's group someday maybe share what their experiences are and what they have found as a helpful way to process what they've experienced with, for example, folks who have been living in a place like Philly that is plagued with a lot of gun violence. And it's not the same thing. It's not at all the same thing. But I feel like that's another group of folks whose trauma is not being seen. You know, just the kids who are walking to school and hearing gunshots, or, you know, like my son whose subway has to stop and he has to get off and take a bus instead because something awful has just happened on the train, or he's witnessed it himself. You know, all of these kids and adults are seeing this every day, and it would be wrong to assume that we're not all being impacted in some way. So I look forward to any opportunities like this to talk to each other, share the experiences, to have someone say, you know what, this is our experience, my experience, it's not yours, and we're going to help each other. But here's a way in which it can relate to what you're doing. Here's a way in which I can help you. Again, it's not the same thing, but I'm reminded of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've heard people say, I am so glad that I'm a recovering alcoholic because it allowed me to have that community that I found in AA. And I feel so fortunate to have that. And those poor non-alcoholics, they don't get to have this. So what can we do to build those kinds of communities? I love the idea of literature being a way to build those kinds of communities. So, you know, it would be wonderful if we could all find something, whether it's related to mental health, whether it's related to trauma or not, but something to help build that community, because we know that isolation leads to mental illness. I mean, I'm not saying there's a direct line and it's empirical and all, but we know that isolation is not good for humans. We've certainly seen that borne out over the last few years. So thank you for being part of this community today, and for coming to the library company virtually or in person, and listening, hearing all of our voices and sharing your own stories.